Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to UCL's lunchtime lecture series. My name is Oyan Blacker. I'm a lecturer at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies at UCL. I'm really delighted today to welcome our speaker, my colleague, Dr. Urszula Chowaniec, who's a senior teaching fellow at SIS at UCL and also a visiting professor at the Andrzej Frycz-Modrzewski Academy in Kraków. Urszula is, I guess, one of the really driving forces behind promoting the study of all things Polish and all things related to feminism and gender at SIS and in UCL. She's the author of the monograph Melancholic Migrating Bodies in Contemporary Women's Writing, published in 2015. And she's also edited several volumes dedicated to various aspects of women's writing and feminism in Eastern Europe, including Women's Voices in Feminism in Polish Cultural Memory, published in 2012, Mapping Experience on Polish and Russian Women's Writing, published 2010, and Masquerade and Femininity, Essays on Polish and Russian Women Writers, which was published in 2008. Urszula's current research is on women's emancipation movements in Eastern Europe and the dialogue between women's emancipation movements and the lesbian emancipation movements, looking at the connections between the language of feminism and the languages of non-heteronormative sexualities in that context. And her lecture today is entitled Lesbians as a Metaphorical Threat to Heteronormative National Order, A History of Sexuality, Politics and Cinema Under Communism in Eastern Europe. Urszula.
Hello, does it work? Yes. Thank you, William. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And today I will be giving a short lecture mainly about this film, Another Way, by Caroline Mak, the 1982 film. But I start from something else. I start from the notion of visibility, lesbian visibility. And this film, however, it is Hungarian film, directed by Hungarian film director. It has a Polish twist. So both of the actresses, as you see it, are Polish. And this is why it gives me a little bit of space or excuse to talk about lesbian visibility in Poland. I will start from this. Then I will go towards the interpretation of this film and how I see lesbian as the thread of heteronormative discourse, national discourse. And then I hope to end with the notion of what to do to increase visibility and whether there are any strategies to work with this even in the national discourses that appropriate lesbianism. Okay, let's start. So I will start with Poland and the initiative to increase the lesbian visibility. I will talk about lesbian inspiration. At the end of this September, one of the most important Polish online platforms, a feminist foundation, Feminoteka, initiated an online action to increase visibility of lesbians in public life and public debates. The initiative was entitled Lesbian Inspiration, Lesbijska Inspira, and it was a manifesto against complete invisibility of lesbian issues, personalities, and themes, inviting artists, scholars, activists, and everybody to share their experiences. And the very first response was the manifest. To the manifest was a creation of a butch character by the artist Beata Sosnowska. And we have the photo from this manifest, the drawing manifest. In the few drawings, the character both tells her tell us how she is present everywhere, as the lesbian can be present everywhere on the both left and right side of the political arena, how she wants to do everything what other people do, and even though she is often rejected also by other lesbians, she is determined to claim herself as being in 100%, hence her name, 100%. 100%, the feminine version of 100%, 100%. And in here, in the in the figure, she says, in the first, starting from the from the corner. I know I have to. Whenever I turn, you don't hear me, no? Okay, I try to talk to the microphone. So the figures here says 1. As a cartoon character, I wanted to take part in the social action 100%, and it's 100% of the tax for one of the LGBT organization. And you know what? I almost ceased to exist. They didn't want me because I confirmed the stereotype of how does a lesbian look. Because I'm big with boobs in the checked shirt. And you know what I mean. But I'm just like that. My name is 100% and I'm real in 100%. The manifesto and Beata Sosnowska's cartoon have been a result of recent article. We're talking about the summer this year. It was an article, or rather like a set of interview or statement with the lesbian leading figures in Polish public life. In these interviews, authors openly stated the marginalization of lesbians in both homophobic discourses, heteronormative discourses, and LGBT discourses. The title, or rather the title of this intervention was Why There Are No Lesbians, Dlaczego Nie Ma Lesbijek, and in the online version, Men, Make Some Space for Us, Faceci, Zróbcie miejsce. And those titles already exposed the main political argument of this intervention. Straight or gay, the world is still masculine. The lesbians, as we know, especially from the feminist movement of 1970s or 1980s, occupy a peculiar position also when we talk about a women emancipatory discourse. Lesbians have been often denied the commonality with women's movement and the feminist goal. We remember the term, for example, lavender menace, that had been created for lesbians by straight feminists anxious to distract themselves from the charge of being feminist, to charge feminists of being lesbian men haters or men hating lesbians. And this peculiar position can be perfectly observed in the first intervention with Feminoteka's lesbian inspiration. A series of fantastic drawing, a mini comic of lesbian situation, a manifesto of someone that is queered all over, as a woman, by her look, by her style, by her choices, by her politics. This is not only a lesbian figure, it is probably the most controversial lesbian figure, a butch, historically rejected also by lesbians as the one that plays with masculinity by assuming it, therefore reinforcing it. And I see the lesbian woman, a butch, a dyke created by Beata Sosnowska, as a symbol of something I called excessiveness of lesbian in social, cultural, public, and academic debate and scholarship, and perhaps the very reason why lesbian is still taboo, even though homosexuality is not. What do I mean by this excessive figure? Lesbian figure points out into identity politics in the era of deconstruction of identity. Lesbian flirts with essentialism when we try to see culture as construction, as I quote, firmly entrenched in the system of sexual difference. End of quote, I quote from Marilyn Farwell. Lesbian is always an excess in trespassing the cultural boundaries of expectation. Never enough of a woman, never enough of a man. Ambiguous in beauty disputes, too pretty is seen unconvincing, rejecting the rigor of fashion as unnecessary and stereotypical rebel. As a mother, always needs a justification, as the wife accused of nostalgia for heteronormative institutions. Even the casual online search for lesbian themes in contemporary public debate connects lesbian with the word excess. Excessive femininity, excessive masculinity, excessive sexuality, excessive drinking, and apparently excessive health problems. Excess is also frequently present in the postmodernist and most lesbian-friendly attempts to define the lesbian, as Teresa de Lorete's idea of lesbian as obliterating the boundaries of gender identity, who does not deny gender or sex by transcending, but transcending them. Well, transcending is quite excessive action. Irony, game, parody, and grotesque, excess, those are the keywords that are often used in the discourse of lesbianism. But at the same time, we have a deadly serious, oh, I didn't give you that, I'm sorry. Deadly serious characters, as Eva Salansky, a passionate and socially engaged journalist in the Caroline Mack Hungarian director in 1982 film Another Way. I am not sure it's gonna work, but let's try. I give you a little bit a collage of those. This is obviously not the original music, but you will hear the original music by Laszlo Desh and Janusz Masik. I will put it down a little bit, and I will carry on. You will see a little bit of presentation of the character. So Eva, the lesbian, this one, Eva is a journalist, and she is an excess. She does not and cannot feed. It is best to be killed. Okay, spoiler. She is killed. We know it from the beginning of the film by the narrative big brother, by the culture, by the heteronormative voyeuristic narrator who glances into the lesbian affair, but his main goal is to present the trauma of Hungarian politics. Okay, main character Eva, the lesbian, is dead. And after the spoiler, let's see the film. Oh, no, I'm sorry, this is all. It was supposed to be like this. Okay. So the main character, Eva, the lesbian, is dead. But let's see the film. Those two characters meets at the elevator, and this is probably the most beautiful scene of the film. They going to the magazine editorial headquarters, where Livia, the blonde, beautiful, hyper-feminine, and married, played by famous Polish actress Grażyna Szapołowska, and she works in this magazine. And where Eva, Jadwiga Jankowska-Cieślak, is about to have an interview, and the interview will be successful. Eva is very talented journalist. She's also too direct, too uncompromising, kind of excessively truthful journalist. And what will happen to her, let's see. But after this little presentation, what I would like you to see is let's see here.
I thought for once it couldn't go wrong.
We have to stop this now. This is the other one. There you go. Yes. Okay, so I give you a 2 minute film presentation, and it is the official trailer of the film. And you have also the official music.
Miért vetted el a bugyimat?
Music is by Laszlo Desh and Janusz Masik.
Nem most. Nagyon nehéz ez, ezt te nem érted. Nézd, vannak olyan érzések. Most nehéz ezt nekem. Én... rossz. Iszonyúan jó.
Rendőrség. Kérem a személyi igazolványokat.
Okay. And let's go back to, as you see, there is almost no politics in this trailer. And but indeed, the politics are the most important in this film. So let's do a little bit of analysis of this film. In this slide, you have a lot of titles. Another way is the English translation of the Hungarian title of the film, and the Hungarian title should be translated something like looking at each other or considering each other. Another love is the English translation of the book on which the film is based. And the title is Another Love, while the Hungarian title is Within the Law. And the Another Look is the Polish translation of the Hungarian film. So there is, and this already tells you this how the workings of the titles. It already tells you about how this film it has been interpreted as talking about love, talking about politics through kind of different look, different glances, another love, another way. The film critics, Mima Simic and Kevin Moss, in 2011 article, and probably the most serious article about this film, entitled Post-Communist Lavender Menace, Lesbians in Mainstream European Film, East European film, analyzed the figure of lesbian in various Eastern European films as the metaphor of, broadly speaking, national construction. They claim that many films, especially made by heterosexual directors who use the motive of lesbian love and lesbian character not to present any truth about lesbian community or communities in any particular countries, but they challenge other politically charged problems. Essentially, and rightly so, Simic and Moss claim that the lesbian film often have very little to tell us about the lesbian lives. And this is most interesting taboo aspect of this lecture. It is not lesbianism that is the subject of taboo. It is the often unspoken and overseen fact that lesbians are used in the cultural discourses as the vehicle of other messages, of dealing with other fears. Just like in the pornography, they are used for the heterosexual pleasures, in culture, they are used to challenge other aspects rather than the primacy of a heterosexual or male homosexual desires. Going back to the film, Another Way, 1982, is the first mainstream film, popular and broadly watched in the mainstream cinema in Eastern Europe, and that shows the lesbian relationship. It was made by Caroline Mark, who sadly died this year, actually in August, very, very recently. And Mark's groundbreaking film was also the first film from Hungary to refer to the events of 1956 as a revolution rather than a counter-revolution. And this is very important. The screenplay was based by Elizabeth Galgoczi in cooperation with Caroline Mark, and it was based on this book, Galgoczi 1980 book called Another Love, or the original title, Within the Law. Galgoczi herself was a closeted lesbian, died in 1989. So part of this book and the film contained the notion of authenticity, which put even more light on the fact how personal lives have been and are subjected to political discourses. She was at the time the head of the Hungarian Writer Union, Mag was also established and well-known director at that time, and the film also went to win the Critic Award at Cannes. Their position obviously also helped to create this film and to tackle those two taboo, the lesbian taboo and the political taboo, talking about officially banned topic of 1956 revolution. The basic frame for the film is Eva's death at the border. She is being shot by the border soldiers when suspecting her to attempt to leave Hungary and it is set in 1958, so 2 years after the revolution. We also see at the very beginning of the film, Livia. She's in the hospital. She's paralyzed as a victim of recent jealousy outrage of her husband, Donci, who couldn't stand confrontation with the fact that Livia wanted to leave him for Eva and shoot her or tries to shoot her in the bathtub. The whole film then may be seen as the projection of Livia memory, retrospective narrative. And we know in this narrative that Eva in 1956 was fired and in the mid of the revolution. Just to remind you, revolution of 1956 is a very important revolution, very important time for the history of Eastern Europe. This revolution was seeking the political change for the Soviet Union unconditional influence in the communist regime. In 1956 is a symbolic year for remembering Eastern Europe communism as a set of attempts to create a better world rather than the subjection or passive subjection to the Soviet rules. The Hungarian Revolution is the first such attempt, a nationwide revolt against the government of the Hungarian People's Republic and its Soviet-imposed policies, lasting from the 23rd of October to the 10th of November 1956. And it was, as a consequence of that, it was thousands of people in the prison, as we have it repeated all the time, and also it was a very bloody revolution. Eva insists, among other things, on calling the events of 1956 as the revolution. And this is a very important aspect of this film, which we cannot see in the trailer at all. And we kind of didn't see it in the processes of publicizing this film. She calls 1956 as a revolution instead of the officially sanctioned counter-revolution. And in between of this political dispute, Eva falls for Livia. Commentators of the film point out to Eva uncompromising, excessively uncompromising character. I quote from Moss and Simic. Eva challenges her editor and she talks back to the police when they find the two women kissing on the park bench. The police sent Livia back to her husband and threatened the single Eva with the arrest. When she protests, they remind her, well, we are not in America. Obviously, in the serious political discourse, it should be hinted that lesbianism is a foreign import, and as such should be stopped. And indeed, it is stopped. Livia is shot by her husband, then when Livia is frightened and desperate in the hospital, she rejects Eva. Eva leaves for the borders and is shot dead. Borders are very, very important in the film. Borders are present in the Eva stories all the time. She trespassed the borders. She transgressed the borders of political correctness in the journalistic writings. Therefore, she is hardly ever published. She attempts to cross the borders of the states, just as her sexual practices are excessive to heteronormative culture. Her main editor, her boss, tells her that there is a limit, border, hatar, to the truths that can be told in the paper, which is ironically called truth, the truth. borders as the spatial metaphors are central to the construction both of the lesbian identity and of the political correctness. Lesbian and dissidents are presumed to be outside, beyond the national. In this perspective, Eva had no chances to survive as a lesbian or as the political journalist. The critic Aniko Imre, the Hungarian film critic, argues that always closeted writer Galgocsi wrote her novel to bring her own unrepresentable subjectivity into representation. And I quote from Imre, "But the only way she could do so by putting the small scream of national allegory into the front of the highly autobiographical story of the tragic lesbian." Yet, I argue that the film, based on the novel, written partly by Elizabeth Galgocsi, does the opposite. Instead of using political allegory as a small screen to present lesbian plot, Mack does the opposite. His goal is to challenge the regime, and he uses lesbian narrative to smuggle his politics on the screen. Moss and Simic think that, I quote, Mack is not at all interested in lesbian subjectivity. In a film that breaks two taboos, political and sexual, the sexual taboo may have been equally controversial, but it was less politically risky than calling the events of 1956 and revolution. For Mack, sexual dissidence is a metaphor for political dissidence, which he was much more interested in. Also, Marx had been quite ignorant about the gay history in Hungary. In the famous interview with Edith Bogota, he says that homosexuality was banned until 1956. Then a few pages later that it was banned until 1953. And in fact, the law against homosexuality as, quote, perversion against nature remained on the books until 2002, although homosexuality between consenting adults was not persecuted since 1961 in Hungary. But that means that actually homosexuality at the time when the film was set, which is in 1958, it was actually illegal. Max admits that he was quite ignorant as his male character in the film about how lesbians do it. And I quote, and I put it as the anecdote, "I would never in my dreams have been able to guess what two women do with each other in the film." Yet, Another Way has been a cult film for Hungarian lesbian and because of the actress for Polish lesbian history. In part because it was the only lesbian film, mainstream film. Hungarians are all very fond of claiming that Hungary was an exceptionally homophobic country, yet the release of this film would appear to unsettle this idea a little. There is also another persistent myth that Mack casts a Polish actress in the lesbian roles because, I quote, "no Hungarian actress would dare to play a lesbian." But Mack himself insisted that this is a mere gossip. And indeed, it would be a quite revelation for Poles to hear that their country was any less homophobic than Hungary in 1982. Another Way creates lesbian as a metaphor for weakness. This weakness is nevertheless used as a cover-up to discuss the national history and the national identity. Lesbian may have been a smokescreen, a cover-up, but in long perspective, there is also a threat, an excess uncomfortable, better dead by the narrator authority in the discourse of retelling the national political story, in extension, creating the national identity. But what are the conclusions of this representation of lesbian in the films? This representation of, we can symbolically say, a monster, representation of fear of the other in the society. Should we actually give up the national perspective when talking about the lesbian? Should we always try to see lesbian on the broader perspective, transnational, beyond the country? After all, to be a woman is to have no country. Her country is the whole world. But following excessively this Virginia Woolf reasoning, perhaps to be a lesbian is not even think in the national country-like categories. Well, however tempted I am by this pan-national perspective, I think it is a dead-end route, and I think it is actually historically false route, taking into consideration how many lesbians were actually active in creating nationalistic discourses. I can refer here to Maria Konopnicka in Poland or to Cecil Tormey in Hungary. I wanted to claim that deconstructing lesbian figure as a metaphor for nationalistic political discourse is not to deconstruct the discourse as unimportant for lesbians. It is to show how they are used it without being considered as significant part of the society, as part of the actual community or the community in need to be constructed. Aniko Imre, which I already mentioned, based on the commentary on activists and feminists such as Romanian feminist Aniko Magyarin-Vince or Polish Agnieszka Graf or Beata Sandorf, Hungarian lesbian activist writer, she claimed that perhaps the best way to unsettle heteronormativity is to challenge the marginalization of lesbians and to take up the strategies of performativity rather than activism. In cultures and regions where lesbians have limited visibility due to extreme religious or nationalistic hostility, serious political activism and essentialist identity politics are not necessarily more effective than the form of performative activism and the playful subversion of representation sanctioned by the local version of heteronormative ideology, she says. That means excessiveness again, with humor, stubbornness like the 100% character. And her excessive repetition that there are lesbians in Poland, that we are here, and there that we are. Perhaps it is the way to unsettle heteronormativity. Performativity as a strategy, just like the campaign Lesbian Inspiration. Will it work? Well, let's see. And I will finish here, but I just wanted to tell you just little things what I prepare for you, but I don't think we have time. But obviously, I wanted to also say that yes, the performativity is actually working also because, like, for example, in music, when we have here Kochana by Renata Przemyk and Kasia Nosowska, I don't have the time to play it for you, but maybe I will play it when we will finish, just to give you a pleasant exit. But this is actually a lesbian music manifesto in Poland. There are plenty other films that actually use the same trace. The lesbian figure are here kind of accidental. We have Guardian of the Frontier by Maja Weiss in Slovenia. We have Find Dead Girls by Dalibor Matacic from Croatia. We have Take a Deep Breath by Dragan Marinkovic, Nadzor by Control by Wiesław Saniewski, and In Hiding by Jan Kidawa-Błoński. The last one, In Hiding, it is on the background of Holocaust story, but lesbian there is just treated like a hyper feminine monster on the way in waiting or in kind of pose on the way to true love which is obviously men. I also wanted to say that obviously gay and lesbian in Poland has always been taboo, but in 1985 this taboo was actually unsettled by the police illegal action, because homosexuality is legal in Poland, or is not criminalized in Poland since 1932. So we are in the avant-garde on European law against criminalizing homosexuality. But indeed, in 1985, we have this Hyacinth action, which is collecting the information about gay, and it's about 11,000 files of 11,000 people, files of 11,000 people in Poland in 1985, and this actually initiated this kind of gay manifesto, increasing visibility. And one of those manifestos is "Jesteśmy inni," we different. And this actually made me think, what are the lesbian manifesto? There are no coming out in Poland, in Polish communist history. There is no stories, lesbian stories. Everything is on the level of gossips, some sort of social laugh, social anecdotes and jokes. And perhaps because there is no lesbian history, this film, Another Way, by Karol Mak, can be interpreted as the first public mainstream statement for lesbian invisibility. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ursula, for a really rich and fascinating talk. I think we have a few minutes left for questions, so I think I'll just open the floor immediately if anyone has a question for Ursula. Yes, hi. We have a microphone there as well, so coming to you.
Hello, wonderful. What inspired you to do this research and putting it into public lecture?
Well, one of the inspiration is my project, which is to increase visibility, to search for the lesbian stories in the perspective of emancipation movement. So I've been working and researching women's emancipation, women's feminist movement in Eastern Europe for almost 20 years now. And then I noticed that there is very little discussion about lesbian issues in this women's emancipatory movement. So I decided to see why, how is it? And I find out many stories, many little anecdotes here and there, especially in the interwar time in 1920s and 1930s. And then I saw this film, which is this fantastic connection between two countries, and I thought it is very telling, and it's very important, especially now when this discussion about nationalism is so vivid. And we should be very careful to see how nationalistic discourses, nationalistic language is appropriating even the otherness, or the most extreme otherness of the society, the most extreme others in the society.
Can I have a quick one? So in your view, after 20 years of research and stuff, what's the way forward? What would you propose if it was possible, whatever is not happening at the moment? Thank you.
I don't know. I'm quite disappointed. I mean, the thing is that in a sense, lesbianism was lesbians were as the issue was felt to be the part of feminism in Eastern Europe. And when I was part there in the late 1990s, I remembered being part of lesbian discussion groups, and I thought it will be part of, but it is part of the feminist movement of women emancipation, of increasing visibility. But somehow it was completely forgotten, and now we, as I started with this initiative of lesbian inspiration, it is a kind of waking up, okay, why, and trying to research why we are forgotten, why we are subjected to other issues, that these LGBT issues are kind of forgot about the beginning, the L of the movement.
Okay, thank you. I think we have one question here from Esther. I think we've got a microphone as well.
Hi, hello. I don't think you can hear me properly because that's my voice at the moment, sorry. But thank you for the lecture. My question is, what is to your mind the most important regional feature of this question, on the one hand of the visibility of lesbians, but also of the LGBT community in general? So say comparing the period that is roughly covered in the film, that's the 1950s, 60s, when in America, LGBT people were facing anti-gay laws, and Stonewall was still some 20 years, so that we were still 20 years before Stonewall. So can you comment on these regional aspects somehow? What you find most important among those?
The most important feature of the region of 1950s or now? Yeah, okay. So it is, thank you very, very much, and I would actually like to thank you, Esther Tassari, because we discussed my presentation, and Esther is a specialist in Hungarian at School of Savoying and East European Studies, and obviously in 1950s we have no issues, we have no discussion of this, there is no really emancipatory movement of LGBT people. And the law that roughly were initiated in Eastern Europe about law that are against decriminalization of homosexuality sometimes are kind of accidental, but basically by not mentioning homosexuality, rather that as the result of serious debate, LGBT-oriented debate. So we have, and it is more or less 60. So Czechoslovakia decriminalized it in 1962, Hungary 61, and there is plenty of it is often earlier than in the Western Europe, or like in a few years earlier than 1967 in UK. Communism feature of was very conservative creation of women, in a sense that women was progressive as a worker, emancipation from the domestic field, but it wasn't emancipated as the sexual creature. And it is, so it was, and then therefore this situation, this kind of doubles in a society called double burden of women, actually as the worker, as the mother, as the domestic creature, it actually smoked the notion that it's also sexual liberation that is needed. The sexual liberation as the feminist movement actually was brought in later on after communism through the Western feminism. And this is why we have this the brackage or strange idea of the wave. So 1990s post-communism is the second wave of feminist movement and female emancipation. But even in this women's emancipation, even in the creation of feminism, lesbianism as such has been forgotten, has been like not treated as serious topic, not really seriously discussed, and somehow kind of taken for granted by the LGBT movement, or LGBT discourses, which are mainly gay emancipatory movement. So, so I suppose those two, mothers and workers in the communist time, and then not really feminist, but not really part of the gay movement, somewhere in between, after the during the post-communism.
Okay, I'm getting some frantic signals from the back of the room that we're running out of time, unfortunately, because I think we could continue this discussion for a long time. So just please join with me in thanking our speaker, Ursula Chowajec, for a really great talk this afternoon.
Thank you.